Today we are painting the flowering cactus, and you're going to want to make sure you have all your brushes out, your white paint, your outline. The colors are vermilion, green deep, flesh tint, and white. And go ahead and get started with your outline. Get that hinge to the top of your canvas panel. Getting ready to transfer. And these videos are always set up so that you can watch the step all the way through, and then a pause icon pops up and we suggest you pause and go back and do the step. Go ahead and pause. Tuck your transfer paper sticky side down, that's the graphite side, underneath your outline. And in this instance, just go ahead and transfer the outside lines of the forms. So that's the outside of the cactus. We're not worried about the pricklies just yet. The outside of some of the flowers and the buds. We're going for sort of the cookie cutter outer contours of the forms in the painting. And this particular painting is kind of two-dimensional in some parts and more rendered three-dimensionally in others, and that's kind of a more graphic approach, maybe, to painting botanicals. So I've got the outsides of the forms all in. Take out your transfer paper. There it is. Go ahead and pause. Get out your red, and you're going to mix equal parts red and green, and this is kind of a double drop. And this is going to be your background tones. So red and green are complements. It's going to make this kind of fabulous eggplant color, and it's going to become kind of a dusty tint that we're going to make as the basis for our background. So we're going to add some white. Make sure you make enough of this because you're going to need to paint your whole background in with it. And I've got my biggest brush, and there we go. It's kind of that thick, rich neutral, and very generously I am painting in the background in this matte, even color. Remember, it's always easier to pull a line than it is to push a line, so you're going to want to pull that flat edge around some of the forms. And you can take your time with this, but we're also going to paint over it quite a bit, so any mistakes, or if you get into your forms, you can always let it dry and retransfer. No problem there. And as it dries, it's going to dry more streaky, and so you're going to see some areas you want to reinforce, so keep that in mind. Go ahead and pause, paint your background. Take a drop of that mixture. Put it in another well. Take a drop of green. It's kind of a double drop of green. We're going to add a little more of our background tone to that mixture. And we're getting touch of white, and we're getting sort of a dusty, desaturated version of our green deep, and that's going to give us that sort of dusty desert look. And we're going to paint in all the dark cactus shapes. And I'm kind of working from the outside in, if you can tell. So I'm getting a nice line on the outside and painting the inside. and kind of opposite for some of these smaller ones. I'm starting from the inside and working my way out to the outside, and it's whatever works best for you. But I'm using my big brush, generously applying paint. And some of that texture I'm going to keep. Some of the streakiness, but if you want it to be flatter, you can always go in with a second coat. It's kind of working my way around the flower, off the page. And we're going to go back in and fix some of these edges after this. So first pass, this is the plan. Get it all covered and in. Go ahead and pause, paint in your dark shapes. You're going to take a touch of the background mixture and some white and not as much green. And you're going to mix your lighter tone. And so it's this kind of desaturated mint color. And we're going to paint in all the light cactus shapes, just like we did the dark ones. And again, I'm making sure I hit that line on the outside first. On the bigger shapes. So on the bigger shapes, I'm starting on the outside and working my way to the inside. And on the smaller shapes, I'm kind of doing the opposite. Starting on the inside and working my way to the outside. And it's whatever works for you. But I'm always very mindful of getting a clean edge. So right now we have a very geometric composition. And that's how this painting sets up. Go ahead and pause. And now we're just going to kind of fix some of our edges. So you see some smaller areas or places you didn't quite hit the first time. Go back in. I'm doing it on this shape right here. But go back in with the two colors you have mixed and clean up any edges or small areas you want. Go ahead and pause. Touch up your edges. And now we're going to dry this guy. You can walk away. You can pull out a hairdryer. And this might take a minute just because we put on a lot of paint. So, and you're going to see we're getting some texture as we dry. Go ahead and pause. Get your dryer out. And in this instance, some of the moisture and liquid pools on the edges, and we don't want that. So I'm taking a pass through with a paper towel, and I'm going to go back and dry some more. Go ahead and pause. Finish up drying. And now we're going to retransfer the details. So we're going to fold our outline back over. Should be nice and dry. Grab your graphite paper again, make sure it's sticky side down. And we're gonna transfer in with our pen all the areas we left out before. So all the little prickly dots, the insides of our flowers. Sometimes these prickly dots are really organized and sometimes they're a little more random. I thought that was really beautiful. We have some cactus shapes in the background that you don't really see them. And I went ahead and hit the edges one more time because I really wanted to find that edge and reinforce it when I go to do that detail again. So I went ahead and transferred in all the edges. And you can take your time with this, but again, we're going to be painting over all this, so it doesn't have to be perfect. Catching all the little areas in the petals and in that center area. If you see, we only see the center of one of these. So we're going to take out our graphite paper and see what we get. And there are all your detail lines. Go ahead and pause, do your transfer. Grab your green. And just like we did for the background, we're going to mix equal parts green and red. And I'm going to refer to that as, because they're complementary colors and they neutralize each other, as kind of a complement base. And this is going to be how we darken our red in the future. We're not going to lighten it in this instance. We're going to leave it in its original state. And we're going to take some of that, and we're going to drop that into 2 new wells. Grab your green, add that to 1 well, and we're going to mix that up. And then we're going to mix that up with a substantial amount of white. So we're going to darken our reds, we're going to darken everything with it. And so that's going to be this really fresh light green color. And this is what we're going to use to paint our details. I'm checking to make sure it's lighter than the green that's on there. And we're going to paint in our dots and edges in our dark cactus shape. And so I don't want, because these are pricklies, I don't want them to be perfect circles at all. I want them to be irregular. And so we're painting in our irregular specks, prickles, needles into our cactus. And we're going to go back and paint the edges, but we're going to hit all our dots at once. Something I've found is when you're doing something like this that you kind of want to be consistent and it's sort of in the flip of the wrist, you kind of want to paint them all at once, because if you go back in to do it, your strokes will just look just a little bit different. Your mark will just be a little bit different. You'll know where you started and where you stopped. So I like to, when I'm doing my dots or something kind of stylized like this, I like to hit all of my areas at once. So it looks like we're going to hit some of our edges now. We're going to start with some in the buds of the cactus flowers, around the edge of our cactus shapes. And this is stylized. This is not something that is as it appears in nature, so don't worry too much about it. The way your stroke looks is the way it should look. This painting's all about sort of geometry meeting realism. And so we've made our background shapes very geometric. And we're going to hit this last one. Edges. Grab the edges around some of these. Background one. Gonna grab your flesh tint, which I call pink, and we're gonna mix that with some white and the complement mixture. And this is actually what we're going to use for our details on the lighter cactus shapes. So you're going to paint in the dots and the edges. And the reason I kind of chose the pink for this is because I really wanted it to stand out. And you can barely tell it's pink, but I didn't want to lose these on the light color on a light green. And pink and green are kind of complementary colors. And so this way they'll still really pop. It's kind of a color theory trick. Paint. Hit all your little dots. What's left of the edges. I'm just cleaning some of them up. You can clean up yours and your painting. Go ahead and pause. Paint in your prickles and your edges. Grab your red, and we're just going to water this down, and then we're going to wash in our blossoms. So very loosely, in kind of a watercolor application, paint in right over the lines your flowers. And again, the important thing here is to cover all the little holes, but you don't want to go too dark because you need to see your lines all the way through. And I'm using obviously a smaller brush. It's whatever is easiest for you. That's why we give you 3 of them. Working my way around. Go ahead and pause, wash in your flowers. Now, you're going to take some of your red and some of your white, and some of your pink and some of your white. And you're going to mix your pink and white and your red and white. And the red and white obviously is a pink, but it's more of a coral tone, and the pink is it's a lot cooler pink. And that's kind of what we're going to use here to build up these blossoms. So I'm going to start with the red and white mixture. And I am kind of with up and down vertical strokes, finding all of the light colored petal areas and putting them in with a thick layer of that paint on top of what I washed in. In the red flowers. Go ahead and pause, paint in your petals. Now I'm going in and at the tops of the petals where it's lightest, I'm working in wet on wet some of the pink that we made with the pink paint on top. Then we're getting this really nice kind of highlight. So where it's lightest on the petals, I'm painting in some of this pink tone and mixing it into the red and white, more coral tone we put down before. And I'm just kind of deciding where that needs to go. And we're going to hit our highlights here in a little bit, so it doesn't have to be as light as it needs to be, but we're putting it in at that point. Go ahead and pause. Paint in your light tones. You're going to reach for your red, straight up red, and paint in your darkest areas. So anywhere where it's especially dark in your flowers, you're going to take your detail brush and paint in some red. Now if you notice, we are not drying these yet. We're kind of painting in wet on wet, and so we know the flower is wet in some areas and taking advantage of that and mixing in what we're putting in on top. So, getting to our buds, all of the dark areas we're hitting with some straight up red. Go ahead and pause. We're going to take some of our complementary mixture and some of our red mixture and mix that together. And it's a really natural way to darken our red. And our darkest areas, we're going to paint this tone in. So these are our shadows. So really where our petals overlap, the deepest nooks and crannies. Go ahead and paint in your darks. And we're going to mix up a little more of that tone and keep going there. Painting in our darks. Go ahead and pause. This was our pink and white area. And if you need to mix more, it was just the pink and the white. And maybe a touch of our background tone. And we're going to paint our highlights in. So the small areas where it goes almost to white, we're going to use the same color that we put on our light cactuses. And you can always just use white or but I used the same tone that we put on our light areas of the cactus. And I'm painting in the very tip tops of these petals where they kind of curve towards the sun. And so take your time at this part, just paint them in where they need to go. I went a little bit lighter than I did on the original example, so you'll see this. These flowers have a little bit more contrast and they get a little bit lighter. I like them both ways, actually. So I'm painting in, these are fine details, just these really curly tips of the petals that catch the sun. Go ahead and pause. And I'm going to dry the flower because I want it to be dry to do these last details. Go ahead and pause, dry it. Going to reach for our red. And now we're just going to do some detail adjustment. Where does your painting need a little bit of cleanup or some detail? We're going to look at our reference. And so I'm working an area that I'd like to just be a little bit cleaner and darker with a detail brush, hitting some of the lines between the petals. But your painting might not need that. But mine did. So that's why I went in with that. I'm going in with just red now. Areas that just need a little bit of straight up red tone, kind of transitioning out of some of those darks. I'm putting those areas in right now. And this is kind of how you work some of these flowers and other parts of the painting, where you just kind of go back and forth and you will know when to walk away. Go ahead and pause, adjust your painting. I'm mixing up kind of a medium tone right here and adjusting a little more. What areas need more definition? What areas need to be cleaned up? Go ahead and pause, adjust some more if you need to. I'm gonna go and add this center to the cactus flower, which is sort of comprised of all of these little speckles. And I do that with the lightest tone I have, and then I choose a couple darker pinky tones too, just to give it some depth. So that's a little bit darker, just the pink and white. So I'm going to recess some of the areas with that. Go ahead and pause, paint your center. And sign and display your painting. This one's one of my favorites. Thanks for doing Time for Art today.